It's pulling up. All righty. Welcome back to another episode of The Story of Your Somebody. I'm your host, Rachel, and today I have a special guest with me, author Glen Williams. He's a retired law enforcement officer. He's a motivational speaker, and he educates law enforcement officials around the country. And I'm happy enough to be able to have his book here, and I've read the whole thing in a matter of a short time, Glen. This is amazing, I have to tell you.
Well, thank you, Rachel. It's good to be here.
So, Glen, you want to promote your book now, or you want to wait till the end of the interview? It doesn't really matter.
Let's do both.
Okay, so promote the book now.
Okay, Bridging the Gap, an inside look at communication and relationships is the story of my life as a police officer, the traumatic things I saw, and how I didn't deal with them very well back then, but how now I've learned to, and that's what I share with others. Anybody who's been through trauma, there's ways to work through it so that it doesn't have a negative effect on your life. It's available on Barnes & Noble, Amazon, Target, and some others that I can't remember. And if when you buy it, let me know. Give me some honest ratings, but let me know what you think, because that's the only way I can make things better.
Is it on Audible? Can we listen on Audible too?
Unfortunately not. I've been researching that, but that's something I have to do on my own. And my publisher doesn't do that. So
gotcha.
I'm working on that.
Well, Glen, let's start at the beginning of your life. Tell us about how life was like for you growing up as a child. Yeah. Well, tell me about your parents and things like that.
Okay. Life, actually, I wouldn't trade it. I grew up in a great place. It's a small farm town in eastern Colorado. My father was a teacher. My mom was a secretary. We rented a place out on the farm. And that's my first 12 years were awesome. I mean, running around the cornfields and the wheat fields and, in the snow, you hook up a scoop shovel behind the tractor and dad pulls us across the field. And they were a blast. We did all the things that farm kids do. And as we got a little bit older, we learned to hunt and we learned to do all that fun stuff. And, my father was a coach also. So I started athletics very young in life. And, it was fun. I started with football and wrestling and basketball and baseball, and didn't have to make any choices when I was young. We just did them all. School, we rode the bus 5-10 miles into town. I don't remember exactly how far out of town it was now. I think about 7, but we rode the bus into town, and that was an adventure. In fact, actually what's funny is my first grade was a one-room schoolhouse with 8 grades in it.
Oh, and wow.
2 miles from the place. Yeah, it was a blast. I've seen the building since then, and now it's a storage for the school district. But that's where I started. And then I went into the big city, quote unquote. Yeah, it had about 15,000 people, so it wasn't real big. And then that's where I started my the schooling there. Like I say, Dad and Mom were always around. Anything we needed, we weren't rich, that's for sure.
Yeah.
But we didn't miss anything. We had meals, we had a place over our head. We didn't do a lot of extra things, but I learned to work. And that was one of the things that I taught is, in fact, one things a lot of things I learned when I was younger, and some of them didn't work later and some of them did. Mm-hmm. But we'll learn, good work ethic, 110% all the time. That's the only way I succeeded in a lot of things was because I outworked people. And it wasn't that I was talented, but anyway, growing up, that was grade school, junior high. That was fun. I got bullied a little bit. People didn't like my dad was a teacher, and some of them would kind of pick on me to get even with my dad.
Oh, and I'm sorry.
It's okay. I learned from it. Like one time my mom bought me a new coat and I went to school in it, and this kid came up and I didn't even know who he was. And he just says, "Oh, new coat." Okay. And he grabbed the sleeve and yanked it and ripped it. Oh. And I thought, man, what the, I was in 7th grade. I was kind of going, what the heck? And then my dad, that happened twice. And the second time I went home And I said, Dad, I don't know what to do, because if I get in a fight, I'm going to get booted and you're going to be pissed off at me. Didn't say the word pissed. You're going to be mad at me, but
Yeah.
you're going to be upset with me. And he says, if he does it again, just hit him. And my dad was a teacher at the school.
Yeah, that's the thing. I'd like to touch on that for a minute about bullies. You don't know what they were dealing with at home, first of all, because that's the reason why some people are bullies, because they got a rough life too. But, I think you should be able to stick up for yourself in school. I don't think you should have to be quiet or run to the teacher all the time. I mean, I don't know if my kids were getting bullied and like your dad said, if they were, I would tell my kids to hit back. I mean, at some point, and you have to defend yourself, so.
Absolutely, you do. And, then in this case, he did it again, and I wailed on him.
Yeah.
And, the kids were pulling me off because they heard, teachers are coming, and they grabbed me. And so nothing was ever said about it. I know he didn't show up to school for a few days because, I got him pretty good. And
Well,
he did not.
How did they punish? Sorry about that. I mean, interrupt you. I was going to ask you, though, you grew up in a time where you still got spanked in school, right?
Oh, yeah. 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 In fact, I had to witness my brother get swats once.
Oh.
And, well, we had these little outbuildings, and he threw a string of firecrackers into the one that I happened to be in class. And then the dummy forgot to duck when he went by the window, and the teacher knew him because he knew my dad.
Oh, my God.
So he just told me, he says, go get your brother and meet me in the office. So I had to go collect my brother. And then I sat in the office and I witnessed this. And the principal at the time was about 6'8", former college basketball player, big guy. And
wow.
My brother had the choice, 3 days off or 3 swats, and he chose the swats. After the first one, he realized it was a big mistake. He whooshed up. That thing almost touched the 10-foot ceiling, and it whooshed on the way down, and boom, and the look on my brother's face was priceless. And, he went like this. And I know that the vice principal let off on the last 2 because he knew our family. We went to barbecues and stuff with him. And he let off on the last 2, but my brother never pulled a stunt like that again.
So what about high school? High school was pretty good for you then too? No problems, or not a lot of problems?
No, I was what they would call a jock. I played football, I wrestled, I played baseball. And the whole 3 years of school, I had 1 day off practice. I took a day off between wrestling and baseball my senior year. And so, no, nobody really picked on me much. I was active, and I wasn't a very big guy. I only weighed 135 pounds.
Oh, wow.
But they said I was too small to be a linebacker on football, but I played center on the offensive side.
Mm-hmm.
And I just was quick, and I could tangle people up. I could knock them down. I wrestled at 132 pounds. So, and then I was a catcher in baseball, and those were great days. The problem that I had in high school was my sophomore year, I got diagnosed with diabetes. I passed out playing baseball on the field in August. And then I was falling asleep during class. I couldn't stay awake. I was sicker than a dog and didn't know it. And the only time I was awake during the day was during practice. And then Christmas vacation, my sophomore year, I ended up in the hospital 2 hours away in Denver. And that's where I was diagnosed, and they taught me how to do it. But, a 15-year-old, 16-year-old kid, I don't know that stuff. And I didn't do well. And I didn't appreciate my mom, because the only way they dealt with it back then was they give you a shot twice a day, and then you limit what you eat. And that well for a 16-year-old boy. I mean, I'd leave my table hungry, and I'd go over to my best friend's house and eat with his family.
Ouch. So, yeah, I was going to mention that too. I have guardianship of my granddaughter, and she's only 4 years old, and she's already a type 1 diabetic, and we're having to manage it already. I mean, kids even 4 years old are diabetics.
That's coming a long way. It's a lot of work, and especially for mom and or guardians at that age. I'm actually writing, my next book is on growing up and growing old with diabetes.
I can't wait to read that one. That's for sure. So what happens after high school?
I went to college. I wanted to be a veterinarian.
Oh,
I
okay.
yeah, but physics and organic chemistry kicked my butt, and
Mm-hmm.
I ended up leaving on probation after 3 years. But I had a heck of a good time. I discovered yeah, I discovered girls. I discovered alcohol. I actually joined 2 frats once so I could party twice as much. And
Oh boy.
oh boy, and or I pledged to their frats, and yeah, I actually rodeoed when I was in college and rode bareback broncs, and then I actually walked on and played baseball, fall ball, and the I was a junior, and I did pretty well, better than I'd ever done before. And the coach said, "Well, we've got a freshman that's on full scholarship. You're just as good as him, but you're a junior. He's on full scholarship. We're just going to stick with him." And I went, "Okay." And then I had left school on probation and I moved out to Utah to straighten up my act, get away from the friends I'd gotten in trouble with. And not that I got in trouble, but that I was doing things that weren't working in life. And
Yeah.
I moved out to Utah. I had some friends out there. And um, so I went from the wild side to the totally opposite side. And I actually served a mission for the LDS or Mormon church. And I joined the church. I just totally was on the the holy side, I guess, for a while.
Trying to find your spirituality there.
Yeah, I got back in touch with a few things, and but it was different than what I was used to.
Mhm.
But yeah, it was a good experience. Um, so I learned there. The culture was way different than what I was used to, and so it was a big learning curve for me.
So when do you meet your first wife?
I was about 20, 23, and
Okay.
we ran into each other at a dance, and I actually got engaged to another gal, and then and this was before cell phones and any of that stuff, and she went
Mm-hmm.
to South Carolina and for a job, and then I didn't hear from her for like 6 or 7 months. So I went, okay, I guess that one's not going to work, and I moved on. Met my first wife, and it was pretty quick. We weren't engaged for a very long time, like probably 4 months is all, and got married, and that's then I got lucky through that. I attempted to go back to school, but then I was finally pulling decent grades. So, um, that was it was a lot of work. And then we had 3 kids, and we were married 19 years,
Yeah.
and it was pretty good for the first probably 13. Uh, yeah, first 12 or 13 years was pretty good, and then my wife fell into depression. And we didn't know what depression was. Um, During that time, I worked for the post office. And I carried mail, and then I applied for federal law enforcement from the post office, and they disqualified me because I have diabetes. They could do that back then, and so that's when I thought, well, I finally figured out what I wanted to do, and to qualify, I had to go back to school. So I
Mm-hmm.
went back to school, and I pulled straight A's for 2.5 years and got my GPA back up over 3.0. And so that was my goal. I made it, and I found an area. I love psychology. Found out that was my niche. And but then they disqualified me from the job, so I became a local cop. And it was during that time that 2 of my kids were born when I was working at the post office. Then my son was born about a year after I became an officer.
So how old were you when you became a police officer?
I was one of those old guys. I was 32.
32.
Yeah,
I did read that in the book, but I forgot.
yeah, that's fine. Most guys start when they're 21.
Yep. 32. Glenn, I kind of have a new, not that I don't like police officers. I'm not one of those people, but just reading your book and the stuff that you went through with your training officers, I really feel for you. I really do. Like, man, I think I would have gave up. I really would have. That's torture.
It was, but that's one of the things that I learned growing up is I don't know how to quit. And
Yeah.
and I can't let myself, and so I just keep pushing. And I did then, and you're right. I probably should have gone to a different department or tried somewhere else.
Yeah.
But once I made it, um, on my own. I was not going to let that go.
The punishment. I didn't even know that happened in the police department. Like the new people that come on and treated like crap, and I just thought you guys just all were like family all the time. You know what I'm saying? I didn't never realize that type of stuff happened. You only see
No,
it in movies, anyways. You know?
yeah. No, the police department's just like your community. It's actually a fair representation of your community for the most part. And you have all kinds of people. You have guys that are just idiots and jerks, and you guys that aren't as sharp as others. And
Yeah.
ones like me that I don't play politics. I suck at them and I don't care. And so if you're not politically astute, then you don't move up very well.
And I just want to tell people that are wondering what we're talking about is in the book, Glenn explains how when he was with his training officers before he became a solo officer, it was brutal for him. I mean, they discredited everything he did. They try to it seems like they just really wanted you to quit, to be honest. They just wanted you out of there, you know?
And
they just criticized him for every little thing that he did.
Yeah, that's true. And I realized that the first night when I walked in, I hadn't met anybody. I didn't know anybody. They introduced me to my training officer, and he took me into a side room, which I later found out was the holding room. And he put me in a chair, and it was the suspect's chair where you grill people or interrogate them. And he sat me down and he says, "You have the reputation around here as a cocky, arrogant know-it-all, and I'm going to change that." And by changing it, he meant get rid of me.
Were you really like that? A cocky know-it-all?
During the academy, a little bit, yeah. And I really didn't even realize it then, but it was a defense mechanism I had. My first wife actually told me, "Yeah, I used to watch you out play basketball with the other guys, and I figured you'd never talk to me because she thought I was too cool." And that was all, it was all a facade, because by putting that facade on, people didn't approach me. People didn't come and do things. And I didn't even know I was doing it. It was a mask. And I talk about masks in my book, but it was one of my masks to protect myself. And in reality, it wasn't protecting me. And the comment, I couldn't figure out where my training officer got that. But I found out later, I had what they call my Rook book, and that's our book of our training and everything that we go through. And when you retire, they give it to you. And one of my fellow classmates in the academy had said that about me, that I was a cocky, arrogant know-it-all. Well, I won the academic achievement award, so I got the highest scores of anybody going through. And I would feel a little insecure. That's how I covered my insecurities, basically. And so I would answer out of turn. My answers were always correct, but people didn't like the way I did it. And to be honest, I wouldn't have either.
Yeah, I understand. So, Glenn, when did you decide you wanted to become a writer? What put that wheel in your head turning?
Oh man.
Is it after the second marriage, or during
I actually thought about it. Yeah, I'm a slow learner. So we'll talk about the second marriage. I'm a slow learner. And the things that I saw in the things I saw in my book are just what everyday officers see. I was nothing special. I wasn't, on any tactical teams or any of the joint task forces going after serial killers or anything like that. I just was everyday stuff that every officer sees every day. Having to pull babies out of ponds and do CPR and, having go through a door when shots are being fired and things like that. It's just stuff that happens in the job. And those are, so I'm a slow learner. So the first one lasted 19 years and I got divorced. And a lot of that was due to that's kind of a weird story too. I'll talk about that first. I gave my wife divorce. She'd been depressed for 9 years. She quit working. I picked up 2 extra jobs. I was working probably 20 hours a day, 18 to 20 hours every day, taking care of my kids, doing everything. And I finally said enough's enough after about 9 years. And I gave her divorce papers. And what I didn't realize, she was depressed. We didn't know what that was back then. But she says, "You can't divorce me. I've got cancer." And I kind of laughed. I said, "No, you don't." You're always using health as an excuse. Well, a few days later, she brought me papers and she did have cancer. Now that shows how bad our communication was at that point. I stopped talking about work because I didn't want to worry her. I didn't want her stress while I was at work. And then she was in bed all the time. So I wasn't talking anyway. And then she had cancer and didn't even tell me. So we weren't in a good place. And that's why we ended up divorced. I held on to it. Pardon? Yeah. I held on to it for about a year.
I'm sorry.
So she had insurance.
Sorry about that. I just had to move a little bit.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So about a year later, I finally pushed it through. And I'll be honest, I did something. I didn't even know I had PTSD at the time. But as I look back on my behaviors, many of them are very common with PTSD. One of the things with PTSD is risk taking. And one of the biggest risks you can take is putting your family at jeopardy, and guys do that by having an affair. And I did. And it's not something I'm proud of, and I will never, ever do that again. But I did. And then being a slow learner, I later married that lady, and we ended up the same boat. I quit talking. I shut down. She'd say, all you do is surface talk, because I wouldn't address any of my feelings. I wouldn't even admit my feelings. That's something I learned growing up. I don't need help. I got this. I don't need to talk about it. Nobody wants to hear about it. And
not only that, I think guys are taught to suppress your feelings. Men don't cry, or things like that.
Yeah. Suck it up, buttercup. That's and that's what we're taught when we're younger, and it's the absolute wrong thing to do when you're in that situation. Those situations I was in later. So that's kind of interesting. Anyway, the second marriage did not work either, and there were some crazy things that happened during that marriage. And my ex pulled a gun on me, and I didn't.
I read that.
Yeah, I sure did not expect that. And you're supposed to be safe at home, and I wasn't. And there's a whole long story to that. But if you want to read the book, you can get on that. But that got me in trouble at work. That got me a little bit of trouble at work because she used my duty weapon. Yeah. And we ended up divorced anyway. But after that, I had a cabin up in the mountains, and I lived up there for 3 years. And so I drove 57 miles to work every day. I switched to another department by then, retired from that department I was at, and went to another department. And so I drove 57 miles to work, but I was identifying I'm a cop. But no, I'm not a cop. I'm Glenn, and I worked as a cop. And that's something I had not figured out at that point. And that's another emotional issue and emotional problem, is when you identify, your work identifies who you are, you're not who you really are. And when I was up at the cabin, I had been talking about putting together a class for officers. And this is where the creative part started, putting together a class.
Okay.
Go talk to officers about communication and relationships, because my goal now is to reduce the effects of PTSD and reduce divorce and suicide. Both rates are extremely high in law enforcement. And I was talking to a counselor friend, and one morning I woke up about, I don't know, it was probably 6 o'clock. I just woke up, and all of a sudden I grabbed a pen and notebook, and I started writing. And I wrote for about 4 hours, and I didn't even remember what I wrote. And I truly feel it was inspired. I went and showed what I wrote, and I had to read it because I couldn't remember it. I didn't remember what I wrote. And I read it to my counselor friend, and she says, wow, you're 60% done. Finish it now. And it took me about 6 more months, but I finished the other 40% and put together the class that I now teach, the rough part of it. And it's been refined a little bit since then. But out of that is where the book came from, because the book is very similar to my class, more stories than I can tell in class because I don't have a week. But that's kind of where the book came from. And the book was very similar. I, again, go back a little bit. I got back in touch with myself at the cabin. I started drinking, and I would get home from work. I'd get up at 3:30 so I could be to work at 6. I'd come home from work, get off at 4. get home about 6, and then I'd come home and I'd make myself a drink. And I was smart enough. I held it to 2 drinks a night, but they were 34 ounces each.
That's about 2
So
drinks in 1 cup.
yeah, and so I was feeling no pain. I was numb, and I started doing that, and I got in that habit. And I'd come home, make dinner, sit down, watch TV, and drink, and then go to bed, and then get up in the morning, go to work. Um, and I got in that habit, and habits are hard to break. But after about 9 months, I woke up one morning and I looked in the mirror. I had a day off, and I said, "What the hell are you doing? I mean, you're screwing your life up, and nobody cares. Nobody's going to change it for you except you." And so I started looking around, and I actually started seeing the aspen trees. I lived up in the aspen and the pines and the deer. I had moose in my driveway. Um, and I started looking around, getting back in touch with nature.
Wow.
And I started going for hikes. When it snowed, I bought snowshoes, and I went through the woods snowshoeing, and just started getting back to me again. Then I went through a self-enhancement training, or a self-discovery type training, and I tore down a lot of walls during that training. And all of a sudden, I started remembering who I am, not the cop, who I am.
Yeah.
And that actually affected the way I treated people. Not everybody's a suspect. Not everybody's out to get you. All that's kind of what we're taught in law enforcement. Everybody's
because you had trust issues. Because you had trust issues, right?
Yeah, but in reality, I didn't trust myself, and those were the issues.
Yeah.
I realized I lived my life back then in fear of not doing the right thing, fear of letting somebody down, fear of saying something wrong. Those type of fears. The physical stuff that was easy. That's what I did as a kid. And so charging in and taking care of something is no big deal. But when I had to deal with people emotionally, I couldn't. And I didn't. Yeah. And think about this. Every officer I know has some sort of PTSD because we just see too much. We see all the stuff that nobody else wants to see. And we're sending out people that are traumatized, with PTSD or some other trauma, to deal with our citizens that are in trauma. And you wonder why there's problems.
Well, let's go back a little bit. If you think about it, you're trying to discover yourself because, I mean, since you've been married and being a cop, and then, I mean, when did you ever have time for yourself at all? Never. I mean, you never really found yourself until you were alone,
Yeah, I did not. And I gave and gave and gave to everybody around me. And yeah, I never looked at who I was. And so I kind of equate that. And I thank you for bringing that up, because I equate that to when we run lights and siren to an emergency, we are taught you've got to be careful getting there, because if you're in an accident or something stops you, you don't get there, you can't be of any help to anybody. And it's the same thing. I have to take care of me, because if I don't take care of me, and that's not being selfish, if I don't make sure I'm okay, I'm of no use to anybody else.
How do you, as a police officer, for instance, the young lady that was shot in the head by her boyfriend, I mean, that is so traumatic to see. And then you just have to go and cry about it for a day and then move on to the next thing. I mean, you never just really get over that, I mean, I'm sure you still think about that stuff.
Yeah, I used to have nightmares about that stuff. I'll never forget the bullet hole with the blood trickling down her nose onto her cheek. I'll never forget that. And there's so many of them that I will never forget. But we learned to work through them. We didn't know how. Yeah, we just blocked it off and went on. And I realize now part of the reason I worked so much was not only because my family needed the money, but it was if I kept my mind busy, I couldn't think about those things.
Yeah.
And so by keeping myself busy physically, and I realize now the Vietnam vets, that's what's going on with them, because most of them are now retiring and they've worked their tails off and very successful, the majority of them, and through life. And now they're retiring, and all of a sudden they're having time to think of them, and they're coming in droves with PTSD issues, because they just worked so hard to forget what they saw.
Well, alcoholism runs in my family, and I remember when I was a kid, I used to ask my grandpa to tell me about he was in the Korean War, and he never wanted to talk about anything, but he was an alcoholic. So I'm assuming he had PTSD and just turned to alcohol to, you know.
I would put money on that.
Yeah. Anyways, okay. Then you were a transit cop after that, right? With the train?
Oh yeah, that was a whole different. Yeah, that was second department, and that was a whole different world. This is interesting because I got in a lot of foot chases and fights, and they call at transit they called me the shit magnet because they knew when I came to work something was going to happen, and the sergeant knew it, the crew knew it, dispatch knew it, and they were just waiting. And I got in 6 years there. I probably got in. Oh man, over 20. I don't know how far over 20, but over 20 foot chases and fights in 6 years. And some of them were a little hairy, but I'm undefeated. So that's all I care.
MMA fighter.
Yeah. But I realized when I was changing, it was kind of interesting. I have a story in there about what I call the big guy. And I was still in that everybody's a threat mode before I started changing. And this guy was about 6'2", probably weighed about 280, great big guy. And I got him off the train, which is our procedure. He didn't have a ticket, so I escorted him onto the train platform because cars can't catch a train if there's something going bad. They can't get up there to help you. So if they're on a platform, at least they can get there. So I'm talking to him, and he's giving me his information, and I had a great dispatcher that day, and I'm glad I had an ear mic instead of the one that comes out loud on my shoulder, because I'm talking to her, giving her information, and she says 1084, which for us means I've got some information that you need to know. Like that. She says the guy had been giving me false information. He reversed his last name and his first name. He reversed the date and month of his date of birth. She says, I can't find any information on the information you're giving me. And she figured it out. And she looked at the picture, and they had me on video. They could see me. And she goes, here's the guy's real information. And by the way, he has a second-degree felony for aggravated assault on a police officer, and he escaped from his parole officers last night. So aggravated assault is assault with a deadly weapon, where I'm at. And
dangerous guy.
Yeah. So now I'm going, okay. So I says 28, please. And that means send me a back. So he doesn't know that I'm asking for a back, and maybe he did. I don't know. But now I start re-asking him questions. Hey, we can't find the information. I want to make sure I've got everything correct here because something I said's wrong. How do you spell your first name? And he'd spell it for me. And then I would spell it back to him really slow. I'm stalling. And same with the last, and same with every bit of information on there. And finally, it gets to the point where he knows something's going on. So I said, okay, man, you've got warrants. You're under arrest. Turn around. And he squared off at me. And actually, I grabbed him, and he started to fight, and everything I had went flying. My sight book, my cell phone, my work cell phone, handcuffs went flying, my sunglasses, everything went flying. And he backed away. And for the first time in my career, I used my taser. I had never used the taser until then. Bang, the top prong hits him right in the chest. I'm going, oh, sweet, this is going to be great. But the bottom prong bounced off his belt, so it did not work. Yeah. And now the chase is on. He turns to run, and he's a great big guy, so I know he's not going far. So I'm thinking, okay, he's big enough, and I'm not that big. I was 6 foot and 185 pounds at that time. And now I'm 5'10" and 190. So, but I wasn't that big, so I knew I didn't want to get in front of him because if he landed on me, he's going to crush me. And if he got his arms around me, he's going to smother me. So I'm thinking, all right, here we go. So I see him running. I'm about 3 yards behind him. I'm calling out on the radio as we ran, and I'm kind of jogging because I ran a lot back then because I wasn't going to let anybody beat me. And as the second time he turned his head, as he turned forward, I just hit him from behind. I figure I'm safe on his back. I'll ride him down. And I got lucky because I got him down on the ground, and he couldn't do anything with me. Again, I used to wrestle, so I know some techniques, and I was using a lot of those to stay away from him. And I had a truck driver pulled up, and he looks out his window and says, "You okay?" And I just looked up and said, "I could use some help." And the guy jumped out and helped me. And so we got him spread out on the ground. Each of us had an arm, and then had no handcuffs because they got tossed on the platform.
Yeah.
So it took about 10 minutes, but everybody started showing up, and we got handcuffs finally and got him into custody. But the interesting thing was, because I used the same things that I had always been doing as a cop, about 6 months later, I ran into another guy on the train. And I'd slowed down before I was going through the trains. Tickets, please, because the more people you talk to, the more people without tickets you find, the more people without tickets you find, the more people with warrants you find. It's a numbers game. And the more people you have warrants, then the more times you go to jail. And that was my job. But I started slowing down and actually pausing with each person and connecting with them a little bit. I got rid of my sunglasses. I'm looking them in the eyes. And that doesn't mean I didn't scan for safety first. I looked at their hands, their waistband, no weapons, we're good there. And then I talked to them. I said, "Hey, thank you. Have a nice day. Tickets, please. Thank you. Have a nice day." Great. And I'd go through and not say the same thing to everybody, but that's kind of the example. And one guy, so I kind of, this is when I was going through my change in me. And so I saw the shift. I started seeing people differently. Because only about really 5 to 10% of people you run into are a true threat.
Yeah.
In the business. So I stopped treating people like they were a threat once I figured they were clean and got it figured out. But I talked to the guy, and he said he had no ticket, so I'm talking to him. And back then with the big guy, we rode the trains alone. After things like that and after enough fights, they started putting us in partners. And so I'm on the train. I talk to this guy. He doesn't have a ticket, and he doesn't look like much of a threat, but I'm not sure yet. My partner goes to the next car to see if he can find somebody to write a ticket to. And the guy looks up, and we're talking, and I'm getting his information, and I'm just being myself, being polite, being nice. And he says, "Wow, you're making this hard." Okay. Making what hard? He says, "You're just being so nice. You're making this difficult." And I said, "Making what difficult?" He goes, "I was going to kill a cop today and hope to die doing it."
God, that doesn't give me anxiety right there.
Yeah, that one still gives me the shivers a little bit. And I kind of took a half step back, and I said, "And how are you going to do that?" And he says, "I have a knife in my pocket." And I said, "Do me a favor. We're on good terms. We're doing good here. Keep your hands on your knees and which pocket, and let me pull it out." And he said, he's told me. So I worked my way around behind him, it was probably about a 6-inch blade, sharpened butcher knife. It was sharp. It was so sharp, I didn't want to put it in my cargo pants pocket in my pants because I thought it might cut through. And then I said, "Anything else?" He goes, "Yeah, I've got a screwdriver in the other pocket." And so I pulled out a long screwdriver that he sharpened into a shank. And the guy was having mental issues. He was suicidal. So we got fire, and I said, "You know what? Here's your ticket." I tore it up. We got him up to the psych ward at the university hospital. And the interesting thing was they sent him, he went into a facility for about a year down in Arizona. And about a year and a half, 2 years later, he came back and ran into my sergeant on the train. And he says, "Hey, tell Williams thank you for saving my life." Because he's back on his meds. He was back in charge. And this guy's now up in some high-rise office building making 6 figures.
This is the way you treated him. This is the way you treated him and approached him and talked to him,
Yeah, and I didn't treat him like a suspect. He didn't have a ticket, okay? The sad thing is, the reason he was hunting for a certain cop, but he was going to take any cop because one of our rookies or one of the new guys about 2 weeks earlier had stopped him and treated him like garbage. Just, "You're a crook and you're stealing from us," and just went off on him, and it ticked him off. And that's who he was looking for. And that guy was actually only 2 stations beyond where I stopped this guy. So he could have caused some damage that day and really destroyed his life. But
a couple of people's lives. Yeah.
But we got lucky that day, and simply because I had started changing, I no longer looked at everybody as a suspect. and talk with him, and like he was a real person.
Definitely. Glenn, I did write some notes down I wanted to go over with you. On page 180 of your book, you put PTSD will affect about 8 people out of 100 and much higher in public safety sector.
Uh-huh.
So that seems like a lot of people to me. 8, yeah.
Yeah. That's
I was
what the
Googling it earlier today, and it's
and what?
Sorry. Yeah.
Is that what it
I
says?
was Googling some. Well, no, I was trying to look up some stuff on Google today just so I could be prepared for our interview a little bit. It says 8.7% of all adults, and that's 1 in 13 people, will develop PTSD in their lifetime.
8.7%?
Yeah, of all adults.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And in law enforcement, it's actually probably closer to 80%.
I'm not really sure. I think maybe they're basing their numbers on maybe a diagnosis, because there's a lot of people that are out there have never seen a therapist or a counselor or been diagnosed for anything. So, they're basing their numbers on people that have been diagnosed. I know that number is a lot higher.
Yeah, and that's what I was just saying. I think it's higher than that, but that's what the statistics were saying. And because especially after COVID. After COVID, these things really started coming out a lot, and I would bet it's up closer to 30%.
And I did write down some other stuff about PTSD, and just in case people don't really know what they're looking for, they maybe just feel like they're stressed out. But it's a mental health condition triggered by a terrifying event causing flashbacks, nightmare, and anxiety. That's something that's happened in your life that's caused that. Behaviors of that are sadness, anger, fear, detached or estranged from others. You build that wall up.
Yep.
You're irritable, and you feel guilty and you can't sleep, or you have nightmares. And some of the risks I see that associate with PTSD are poor eating habits, decreased physical activity, and they have a higher risk of developing cardiovascular disease, obesity, and diabetes. There's a lot of things associated with post-traumatic stress disorder.
Yeah, a lot. And then the behaviors are so detrimental to family, even your own well-being.
Mm-hmm.
Thrill seeking is a huge one. I realized looking back, and I didn't figure this out actually till a couple months ago after the book was written, but many of the foot chases and fights I got into were ones that I kind of talked my way into. I was thrill seeking. I loved the thrill of the chase. I ran 4 miles every other day fast, just so I wouldn't get beat by some 20-year-old. And that was when I was in my 50s. And it's the thrill seeking is a big thing that I didn't even realize until a couple months ago. And the affairs, I didn't correlate that with it at all until a couple months ago. And the poor diet, yeah. You just don't take care of yourself because you don't care.
You don't care, yeah. I think maybe I don't really know unless I would talk to you about it, but sometimes, maybe you just felt alone in your first marriage and you just wanted somebody that you could connect with, I think that's a big part of the reason why people have affairs other than post-traumatic disorder. But, in the book, you just seemed really lonely to me.
That was part of it. And I blamed it on that for a long time. But then as I look back now, I kind of also look at, it was exciting. It was forbidden.
It was a thrill seeking.
Yeah. And as I look back at that, it started with I was lonely. But then when things started, I wasn't going to let it stop.
Yeah, I definitely can relate to that. Well, Glenn, anything else you want to plug in while we're talking here? Tell us about your website. Where can people look you up at?
You can look me up at www.gdub, that's GDUB author.com. If you know any officers or any companies that would like talking on about communication and relations, because communication relations are key in every part of our life. I would love to come out and speak with them. Let me know, and you can contact me through my website. Um, Again, my book is on Barnes & Noble and on Amazon. And you've seen it a couple times, Bridging the Gap, but you got to put my name in too, because there's a lot of bridging the gaps. and yeah, and then look for my next coming books up. One on growing up and growing old with diabetes, and I'm writing one about a Native American who discovers a shadow group that is killing natives, and he's a police officer, and that's his gift, is to have to solve that. And
be interesting.
yeah, it's kind of fun. I've learned an awful lot in my research, and I actually have some natives working with me so that I make sure everything is accurate.
That's going to be amazing. I can't wait for that. You got Facebook and Instagram and all that stuff too?
Yeah, I don't have the codes for those, but you can look me up under my name, Glen Williams, and you'll see me. I'm in a picture with my dog on most of them. I'm on a mountainside.
I saw that too. Yeah. Glen,
Yeah,
one more thing. I was wondering, what if somebody just wanted to reach out and chat with you? Are you willing to just talk to anybody?
Oh, absolutely.
Besides in a group setting?
Yeah, absolutely. I will do whatever I can. Again, reach out through my website. That gives me notice on my email, and then I look it up and I can reach back out. I don't check it every day, but when I get a notice in my email, I do. So I'm more than willing to assist anybody that I can. And my whole goal, I'm retired, but my whole goal in my life now is to make a difference, and I get to do that through this process.
You sure do. You sure do. Everybody go out and get the book, Bridging the Gap. It's a wonderful book. I'm telling you, I read it in a matter of hours. I mean, Glen trains police officers and in the public sector. I mean, I'm sure you would train anybody, but there's stuff in this book that everybody can relate through, and to help you get through stuff. I'm discovering that myself, and I think you're an amazing person, Glen, and I'm really glad that we got to get together for the interview.
Rachel, I appreciate it greatly, and this is why I get the word out, but then I get to meet great people like you.
Thank you so much, Glen. Take care.
Okay, you too. Thank you.
Okay.